You still don't understand what you're dealing with. Perfect organs. F-41.
Okay, hi guys, and welcome to the show. And today, a very special review indeed. Something out of the ordinary, an auspicious occasion, because I've been waiting since 2019 to share this with you, because I flew out to the Reno Air Race, if you recall that video. Fortis very generously invited me to see their racing team, something they sponsor, compete, and it was amazing. So I got to see the prototypes, and of course I had to keep stumm for over a year. It was very, very difficult, but I love the brand. I'm a huge fan of the brand. I visited their factory, of course, back in 2017. I own the official cosmonaut chronograph, the most underrated Swiss brand, and probably one of the most important as well. If you really know horological history, you're going to know how significant they are. Not only to space watches, but to automatic watches, because they were one of the first makers or manufacturers of the automatic wristwatch. I'll leave a link there. There'll be a box or something to my previous video. I'm going to skip the history because we've got to get through a lot of watches. They've sent the entire range, 4 watches today. So I'm going to leave the history there. Have a look back at my previous review, because I really go in depth discussing their wonderful legacy. And what else? Oh yeah, wristwatch check. I'm wearing the Tudor sub on the Alamein strap. I'll leave a link down below from Wrist County Watch Club. But this is very deliberate because it actually has something to do with the Fortis we're looking at today. Well, one of them. So without further ado, let's get into the review. My God, look at this glorious bunch we have here. So as you've probably figured out, the name dictates the size. So we have the F-39, which of course is 39 millimeters. Now usually I do get the old calipers out, I do all the measurements, etc. I will leave them on screen as we are, I don't want to take forever as we have all of these to get through. It is important to note that the case is flush with the bezel. Then of course we get the F-41, the F-43 chronograph, and the F-43 GMT there. As for materials, we have entirely brushed stainless steel, with the exception of the Triple-GMT, which you could probably tell is a tiny bit darker, and that's because this is titanium, and it makes a remarkable difference to the weight. The final weight will vary because of course I had to take quite a few links out, so it's even heavier, but for a watch this size, that is quite a staggering amount. The GMT is only 154 grams. So very, very light indeed, and you can really tell. But gargantuan F-43 chronograph is a staggering 228 grams. So a serious bit of kit on the wrist. In terms of the back, they are all pretty much the same. Obviously different details on each, but we just have a very modestly engraved with the propeller there, screw and case back. What is interesting to note is that the water resistance on all of these is a very impressive 200 meters. Even for the chronograph, which of course, you've got the extra pushers, they are all screw down crowns. They are wonderful to grip. You get a lot of purchase, very, very solid feeling. And you'll notice there's a little bit of, it looks like a gasket on the outside, and it matches the black underneath the bezel there. Whether this actually assists the water resistance, I'm not sure. I would imagine so, because of course the 3 points of entry are any buttons or pushers, the actual front, and then of course the case back. So it would make sense. If we switch to the F-41 there, you can see the flat sapphire glass. It sits sunken because of course the bezel, which we'll talk about in just a moment, is concave, with very nice coinage on that bezel as well. The glass itself has anti-reflective coating both on the inside and outside. To save a bit of cash, you can get these watches on a aviation style strap, but I have to say the Bracelet is a true capolavoro. You have a double push button clasp there, signed of course with the Fortis crown, and look how it's bead blasted, just to add a little bit of embellishment there, a little bit of detail. Really solidly done. But the real star of the show when it comes to this bracelet is inside. Do you see how beautifully milled it is? But also that button there has a little slide lock system, and it's ratcheted, so you can choose, let me zoom in, increments, I believe in like 1 or 2 millimeters difference. And then of course you've got screwed links, and they're quite small links as well, with a very solid tube and double screw system that is just amazingly robust in its feel. So it's a 3-link system, all entirely brushed of course. This is a tool watch after all, and then we have screwed spring bars where the watch meets the case with these kind of eagle, to me it looks like an eagle, curved down, very, very typical of Fortis. You'll see it in a lot of their watches. So instantly adjustable, bit like the glide lock on the Rolex. Very, very useful. Being able to adjust and get the precise fit, incredibly comfortable as well. The bezel itself is a 12-hour bezel, so we have a second time zone in terms of your standard Flieger, and then of course with the GMT you have 3 time zones, because you have the inner second 24-hour corresponding fourth hand, and of course main time there, and then a third on your bezel. They are bi-directional. You get 24 clicks, and they are very precise where it lands. Extremely handy, obviously, if you're a pilot, but also if you're like me, you have family all over the world, you want to keep track of them, or you're just traveling. This is a great companion. The luminescence for all 4 is pretty much the same. We have something very special indeed. It's their newly invented bricks track, and we'll discuss a little bit more about that later. But orientation is impeccable because of course you have that quintessential Flieger arrow at the 12 o'clock, so you always know which way up it is. The lume itself is in a C5 Flieger green, and they've even raised it, if you see there, on this extra track that runs around the periphery of all 4 dials. The contrasting matte dials, the chronograph obviously has beautiful balanced Bicompax layouts, as the name suggests. They all have sword hands, of course, with these dashes of what they call burlap fluor neon orange, which is just so indicative of the brand. It's the most, or one of the most visible colors known to man. They've been using it since the 90s, designed specifically for their space-going watches. It's unique because it reacts to UV light and also just adds a kind of fun, a little bit of pizzazz. The hands themselves are all blacked out, but of course you got the seconds hands are always treated with that neon orange. So very, very easy to distinguish because of course the hour and minutes are also quite broad and generously applied with lume as well. The layouts of all the dials follow a very cohesive, disciplined, I would say, and beautifully proportioned placement for all their varying complications. For the F-39 and 41 we have the date at 3. For the chronograph, symmetrically placed at 6, allowing more space for those slightly sunken subdials. The buttons on the pushers are concave with kind of grid style knurling. You can really feel it. It's actually extremely efficient and follows your typical stop, start, reset placement. A subtle bit of design, but very effective. On the GMT, the extra fourth hand of the GMT moves at a slower 24-hour pace. the same manner as most GMTs. Nicely touches the markers. But this one, I have to say I'm very impressed with, because unlike the others that have modified Val Jeu in the chronograph, and also your typical kind of Celita or ETA based movements in the other two, this however has something very cool indeed. Inside you'll find the Work 13 caliber, which is a collaboration between Fortis and Canisi, which is founded by the Tudor brand. Has a very useful 70-hour power reserve and is far more robust because, of course, it has the traversing balance bridge with the 2-point fixation that improves the shock resistance and allows for very precise positioning of the oscillator. If you just peek down, let me see if I can see this with my camera. Right there at the 4 o'clock, you'll see COSC certified. But I have to say, across the board, they are all incredibly accurate. And I asked Fortis to what level they regulate them. They try and get them all as close to COSC before they leave the factory. So accuracy was just outstanding. To be honest, there was only a few seconds deviation between a lot of them. So they were pretty much all performing within COSC, although the GMT is the only one that's officially been certified. Aside from modifying them and regulating them, a vital aspect to the brand is the rigorous testing that is carried out at the newly renovated state-of-the-art factory. They put them through quite an extraordinary amount of punishment to try and simulate the ability to withstand a journey to Mars and back. And now, when they said this, I thought they were joking. I thought it was just a marketing slogan, but they really do. So it's not just the corny phrase. They really do test the hell out of all their watches. So when it comes to performance, absolutely top notch. This is the 4th generation of Fortis Flieger. The evolution started in 1987 with a very faithful take on the iconic German design. As each new iteration was introduced, Fortis injected more and more of their own style cues and features, culminating in various spin-offs, including the vintage-inspired range that we have reviewed before, and the modern and highly nuanced offerings. The 2020 generation feels much more like a relaunch instead of merely improving on past designs. They went back to the drawing board here to create something entirely new, while simultaneously keeping some of the defining features that Fortis has picked up over the years, unique to the brand. For example, the eagle beak angular lugs, the use of fluor orange, and a return to a tooltastic all-brushed case rather than the high polish of some of the previous generations. The decision to add a second time zone makes a lot of sense, a far more useful complication for every day, rather than a fixed tachymeter. The choice to make it concave makes the surface of the coin edge larger, thus more practical to turn. Compare it to a more conventional sloped bezel, like the one on my Tudor sub, and you will instantly see what I mean. This is by no means new. The Breitling Chronospace I previously owned had a Navitimer slide rule bezel in a similar fashion, but not executed nearly as well as this particular Fortis. It's also finished with circular brushing that concentrically follows the shape of the bezel and is engraved and then black lacquer filled for the numerals of the hours. The use of the orange to highlight important features is an especially clever touch. A prime example is the main seconds hand and how it corresponds to the 30-minute subdial on the chronograph as they work in conjunction together, as well as all of the date windows, and of course the GMT central scale. It is also utilized in their new trademarked Synchro line, which is a simple but highly practical detail with a precise gap at the 12 o'clock. Not only does it allow the ability to accurately synchronize the watch, but it is also a nifty feature for pilots. If you too were at the Reno Air Race, for example, you will know exactly what I mean. The illuminated bricks give these watches an alluring three-dimensional quality, applied on a circular brushed raised track to skillfully increase the average readability speed, but also at various angles. That then leaves a recessed area at the very edge of the dial, but in the chronograph's case, there are printed white hash marks for precise reading of the seconds. Aside from the obvious complications, materials and different movements, the dials all have a clean, uncluttered harmony, perhaps the GMT being somewhat of an exception. We see the typical high contrast between the flawless, crisp white printing and the matte black dials. The biggest variation is, of course, the GMT, that has a slight horizontal brushed finish compared to the finely grained texture of the others. The bricks tracks is also white on the GMT, and not the seafoam green tone like the others. I suspect this is also to slightly differentiate it from the steel versions, to complement the lightly darker titanium tone. So let's talk about the positives. Well, undoubtedly, there's no pretense with these watches. This is the real deal. They're unclouded by delusions of luxury or anything like that. There's an honesty about them, and I really respect it. Unequivocally, we get the same high quality that we're used to from Swiss manufacturers, but taken one step extra with all that lovely testing that they do. The sense of luxury doesn't come with superfluous decoration. It comes with attention to detail and an exquisite level of quality. You know, that's where it comes in. And I like that. There's a honesty about it. I also think it's important to take into consideration the heritage. Still independent, incredible legacy. I mean, the choice of the Russian Federal Space Agency. You can see why when you handle this. You understand why the Russians picked them. But not only them. I mean, so many very prestigious squadrons of Air Force pilots, military Air Force pilots, all over the world. I mean, have a look back at the previous review. It's staggering, very impressive. And I do really feel it's good value for money. You're always going to get detractors saying, oh, I wouldn't pay several thousand for that, or whatever the price, depending on the model, of course. But the truth is, this is the cost of making something to this standard. There's no shortcuts taken here. And if you know the costs involved in manufacturing, I think you will agree with me. It's easy to say, oh, that's too expensive. But when you've been to the factory, you've seen what goes into producing, designing, releasing, and putting together and testing and all the rest of it, you start to understand the mammoth cost it is to produce Swiss watches to this level, let's not forget. But at the end of the day, the biggest positive here has to be it's built for task. It's not going to disappoint you like the crystal popping out famously on the moon watch when they landed and they had to resort to using the Bulova. That's not going to happen here. You know, this is definitely not going to happen. This is undoubtedly far more tougher than a Speedmaster ever will be. Okay, I still love the Speedmaster, but yeah, this is David and Goliath here in terms of toughness. I also feel it's a true enthusiast's brand. And, you know, if you see somebody wearing a Fortis, you even know that they're a professional pilot or they're a true watch connoisseur, and I think that means something. I also love the fact that there's multiple sizes. I do wish there was a GMT in the 41mm size. I think that would be a little bit better than the 43, but you know, at the end of the day, they did make a 39. Yes, finally, thank you, Fortis. So yeah, top marks all round. I mean, these watches are the Kipper's knickers. So when it comes to negatives, well, I've brought my particular Fortis in here. Something that I do miss with these new Fliegers is the whimsical kind of playful nature that mine has. Now, I understand this is quite different because it is, as you see from the dial, we have the International Space Station, so we have this rather kind of playful motif on the dial, but also I love the arrow tip, or I guess sometimes call it the jet, that sits just below the seconds hand, because of course this is a far older Lemania based movement. Yeah, you could say that these are a little austere perhaps. Now, one big complaint for me was the long lugs. Even on the 39mm version, I did find the lugs a little bit exaggerated. While I understand why they do this, because you know, the bigger the lugs, the more securely it is fastened not only to your wrist but to the actual bracelet. While it is unquestionably versatile in any situation, like, you know, its water resistance of a diver, etc., it's purely utilitarian aesthetic. It's certainly not going to be as sartorially compatible with more formal attire. But again, if you're into that, if you want a no-nonsense watch, you might just find the beauty and the purity of its purpose. However, my biggest negative when it comes to this watch is on the 39. They didn't go with a smaller bracelet. This is actually the same lug width as on all the other models. It's a shame it wasn't proportional to the smaller diameter. I feel it just adds to the extra weight and made it a little bit bottom heavy, if that makes sense. But if you see what I mean here, this should have been smaller. It would have been nice if it tapered as well, because it would have cut down on that extra weight. I do feel the buckles were a little bit clumsy. Typically with watches, I'm not a fan of like the tubbiness, but in this case I'm willing to forgive it, because these are, you know, these are tools, and I enjoyed that extra presence. It's not a dress watch. It's not designed to slide under any particular cuff. This is the antithesis of a dress watch. If you were to make a mechanical analog equivalent to a G-Shock for pilots, this would be the result. The mantra at Fortis for these particular watches is "Tool watches redefined." And boy, have they succeeded. It's like they have gone back to the very essence of what a pilot watch should be, and made something somehow still fresh that serves its purpose with ruthless efficiency. But most importantly, still maintaining the key traits and consistent design language that defines what Fortis is all about. Recently, I've also been enjoying the latest season of The Expanse on Amazon, and while it is futuristic science fiction, its aesthetic is so believable because it is based on things we recognize in our present time. I feel Fortis have achieved the same thing here. It's a compelling, contemporary and highly capable Flieger, but for the 21st century. And they've somehow taken something very classic, and it would be right at home on the wrist of any of the characters on that TV show. It's certified pure class, and I think Fortis should be very proud indeed. So I'm going to leave it there. Now the question remains, am I going to pull the trigger or not? And I have to say, not just yet. I hear there are some new releases in the pipeline from Fortis, so stay tuned. But in the meantime, I'm going to be keeping my eye on them. Do check out their YouTube channel. I'll leave a link down below. Amazing videos, one of the most underrated, as well as being an underrated brand, channels out there, a wealth of content. I'll leave a link to that. What else? Oh yeah, don't forget to add your thoughts, queries, comments, opinions, all the rest of it down below. And as always, the most important thing, don't forget to like the video, especially if you want to see more independent, unbiased, in-depth reviews like this. Then please do hit that like button. Alright guys, thank you for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.